Moving is always a hassle, but if you hire the wrong moving company, it can be a nightmare. An alarming number of consumers tell Checkbook they're disgusted with movers who arrive hours or even days late, lost or broke their precious possessions, reneged on promises, and demanded more money than the quoted amount. I'm Herb Weisbaum, a contributing editor at Checkbook.org.
Welcome to Consumerpedia at Checkbook.org. We're the nonprofit that helps consumers select services, avoid trouble, and save money. Because we don't accept any advertising or take money from any business we recommend, you can rely on Checkbook.org to be completely independent and objective. Now, here's the host of Consumerpedia, America's consumer expert, the consumer man, Herb Weisbaum.
In this episode, tips on choosing a moving company that provides fair and reliable pricing, a company that will get the job done on time and take good care of your belongings. Plus, why you want to avoid moving brokers and how to spot moving scams. Here to help with all that, Checkbook's executive editor, Kevin Brassler.
Hello again.
I think you have more experience with moving than I do. Tell us what you've done.
Yeah, well, so in the last 15 years or so, we've moved twice. And the last time we moved, it was to a house located 2 blocks away from our old house. You know, why? Yeah, I'm still not sure. I mean, I'm not in charge around here. It was something about needing a bigger kitchen, but then I'm really the only one who cooks, so I'm not sure why that mattered. But, here we are.
Well, Deb and I have been in the same house for 38 years now. I have no plans to leave. Quite frankly, I would rather have a root canal without Novocaine than move again. And I've decided that if I get too old to climb the stairs, I'm going to put in an elevator or an escalator, or I'll hire a Sherpa to get me up the stairs, but I'm not going anywhere. I used a moving company for both of my moves. One was cross-country and one was locally, and thankfully everything went as planned. I assume you hired a mover to take your stuff down the street?
Yeah, last several times, and this last time they loaded up all our stuff. It took 2 full moving trucks to move our stuff. And they loaded both up, and they said, where are we going? And I said, well, you can pretty much see the house. It's just right around the corner over there. They all got into one truck, and then they sent a guy back. He just walked back for the second truck when they were ready for it. So it's kind of funny. But, the good news is, especially for our last 2 moves, everything went really, really smoothly. The workers showed up on time. They did just an amazing job. But really, unfortunately, most moving customers aren't so lucky. Really, out of all the services we evaluate, we probably get more complaints and negative ratings for moving companies than any other service.
So what are the common problems that folks report to Checkbook?
I think part of the problem is it's just a very difficult job. I mean, you're moving everything somebody owns, and inevitably things sometimes do get broken. But probably the biggest complaint is delays. Movers, they often don't show up on time, and sometimes they don't show up until the next day when they're supposed to be there, and that can create tremendous stress on their customers. If you're closing on one home or you're renting and you need to be out of that home, things can get bad really quick if the movers are late or don't show up at all. Sometimes it's not the moving company's fault. I mean, the last time I moved, the guys told me that a few days before, they showed up to move this family, and they said, it's as if we were the only ones who were aware that family was moving that day. They got there, and everyone was sitting around eating breakfast. Not a single thing had been packed up. Even the TVs were still plugged in and running, everything. But a big problem with delays occur due to bad scheduling, especially for long-distance moves. And another, common problem, as I mentioned, is that stuff gets broken.
Well, not showing up on time is annoying. Being careless with your possessions is unacceptable. But an even bigger concern is doing business with shady companies run by scammers who try to extort extra money from you after all your stuff is in their truck. There are some real horror stories we've heard about that.
Yeah, and moving scams continue to be a big problem. Criminals will take in money for moves and then just disappear. But another big source of problems comes from moving brokers. These are legitimate companies, but many of them pose as local moving outfits. If you do a search for Washington movers or whatever, many of the ads you'll see are for brokers, not real moving companies. What these are, they're just middlemen. They don't own or operate trucks or employ any movers. They simply collect a deposit and sell your job to a moving company, which then does the work. But, of course, the problem is If you use a broker, you have no control over who actually is going to get hired to do your move, and you may get stuck with a really bad company and have little recourse for problems because, after all, you've already paid the moving broker. And then when trouble occurs, some really aren't that helpful in mediating disputes between customers and the movers that they've hired. Another problem is that brokers sometimes can't find a moving company to handle your job that they've already taken on, that they've already gotten paid for, and they leave customers scrambling when no one shows up on the day they're supposed to move. Consumer agencies and the Better Business Bureau, they receive really high numbers of complaints about brokers. And a lot of them are, from customers who got stuck with rogue movers who refuse to honor the prices that they've already been paid. Once the truck reaches its destination, they say, oh no, now we want extra money. And they come up with all kinds of various excuses for demanding it. So our advice really is just to avoid brokers altogether.
So when you're looking for a good moving company, how do you make sure you're actually dealing with a moving company and haven't accidentally contacted one of these brokers?
Yeah, I think the first thing is assume that all the ads you see on Google, they may be for real moving companies, but they may not. They may be for brokers. Some of these brokers, they're really persuasive, and others are just straight up dishonest about how they work. So I'd say, check to make sure any company you're considering will actually be doing the work. If a moving company can't provide a local address where it parks its trucks or has its storage facilities, and especially if they can't come to your home to prepare a written estimate, those are big red flags that you may be dealing with a dishonest broker. And definitely don't pay a big deposit up front to any moving company. With most, for a local move, you don't pay anything until the job's complete. And for the most part, even for long distance interstate movers, it's better to pay a really small deposit up front. And that way, you've safeguarded yourself against losing a lot of money from one of these scammers who just takes in a lot of money and has no interest in actually providing you service.
Clearly, this is one of those transactions where it's really important to get quotes from a couple of companies. I know Checkbook's undercover shoppers find huge price differences for the exact same job.
Yeah, this is really important. Our undercover shoppers collected prices for 2 local moves and 3 long-distance moves. And we found that, some companies charge prices that are 2 or 3 times higher than others for the same job. And the lower-priced companies, they often got great ratings from their customers. So you can't assume that a really good price is going to mean that you're going to get bad work. The other reason to meet with several companies is so you can discuss with them, who will do what. If you have a piano or some, really large item or something needs to be disassembled and then assembled again, who's going to handle that work? Ditto for precious, fragile items. I mean, it may be best to move them yourself, but it's better to discuss that with moving companies. And meeting with movers, it'll also help you prepare. They might tell you, for example, that you don't need to empty your clothes drawers for dressers because they can just wrap them basically with heavy-duty saran wrap and move them full of stuff. That saves you a lot of time. They can also give you tips on, the best way to stage stuff that you've packed up. That will save them time, which will save you money. Some moving companies, they have certified moving consultants who can help with that type of advice. I found that, chatting with those people or just with companies, they've had somebody who's been in the business a long time was really helpful in getting ready for our moves.
So there are basically 2 types of moves, as we mentioned before, local and long distance, and they are very different, very different. We're going to talk to Kevin about that next. I'm Herb Weisbaum, and this is Consumerpedia, powered by Checkbook.org.
Okay, so you're ready to shop around for a moving company. Checkbook has quality ratings for local movers in these metro areas: Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis-St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. If you live in or around one of these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, get a free 30-day subscription to all of our ratings by going to checkbook.org/Consumerpedia.
Something that's very important to understand, the difference between local moves and long-distance moves. The way things work are very different between them. Kevin, could you explain that?
For local moves, it's usually a pretty straightforward arrangement. You hire a company and it supplies workers and trucks, and those people move you. For local moves, you almost always pay by the hour for packing if you want help with that. And then you also pay by the hour for all the loading, unloading, and transporting your goods from point A to point B. So it's, whatever, $200 an hour or $400 an hour or whatever it is for a 6-person crew or a 4-person crew or whatever they quote. So again, for local moves, ask several businesses to send someone out and look at what you got and provide cost estimates. Again, you're likely to pay by the hour, and they're going to estimate about how many hours they think it will take to move you, and you're going to find really big price differences. You'll also see big time differences because some movers will say it'll take 10 hours and some will say it'll take 6. So if you see really big differences, especially for the amount of time they're estimating, it's a red flag. I mean, if one mover says it's going to take 15 hours, another one says it's going to take 4, somebody's way off base. And it's worth asking a lot of questions about why they're using that estimate. A problem with local moves is that any estimates you get are usually just that, estimates. Often companies take longer than the estimated to do the work, and you end up having to pay more than you expected to. That's a really common complaint. You can ask local movers to provide estimates with a cap, or what's also called a do not exceed price. Some will do this, some won't. And unfortunately, in some states, including Illinois and Minnesota, moving companies there are not even allowed to give you an estimate with a cap for local moves. But in other states, California, Maryland, Massachusetts, Washington State, for example, any written estimate you get for a local move, by law in those states, is an estimate with a not to exceed price. Usually it's the mover can't charge you more than 25% more than what they estimated, so long as they put it in writing.
And long distance moves are priced very differently from local moves. And as you already mentioned, sometimes several companies are involved in the process.
Yeah, so for a long distance interstate move, if you want help with packing, well, they're going to charge you by the hour, just like you would pay for a local move. But for the loading, for the transporting your goods across the country, and for the unloading, the pricing works very differently for these long distance moves. Federal regulations for interstate moves require companies to charge prices based on a formula that takes into account the weight of your belongings and the number of miles they're going to travel for your move. So when you invite companies out to provide pricing for interstate moves, they can only really eyeball your stuff to estimate its weight, but really good moving companies are good at doing those estimates. Then what happens is during the move itself, the company will have the truck weighed to determine how much your stuff really weighs, how many pounds, and then it can give you an accurate price. It's going to be a reduction or increase based on their original estimate, but at that point they can give you a binding price because they know how far they're going and they know how much your stuff weighs and they can apply it using their formula. But still, it's, to avoid surprises, it's really important to get an accurate estimate up front. So just like for a local move, invite several companies out to bid on your job and compare what they say. Their estimates will be different from one another because they can't weigh every item. They're not going to do that. But at least you'll get an idea of what you'll pay with each company. And as I said, the nice thing about interstate moves is once they've weighed the truck, you can get a binding price for your job, unless you have extra services they don't know about, like they have to shuttle your belongings in vans to get up a really narrow street, or you're not there when they're ready to unload, and so they have to wait for you. Unless there's something like that, there shouldn't be any surprises in terms of price.
I don't think most people realize that with an interstate move, their belongings might get moved from one truck to another truck during the course of that, and they might get packed onto a truck with other people's stuff.
Yeah, I think most consumers are surprised by this, especially for really long moves from coast to coast, for example, where it takes 4 or 5 days to get your stuff there, or even longer. A local moving company or agent for an interstate moving line, they'll book your move, and usually that local company at your starting point will supply the workers to load the truck. But often after that, your stuff will get transferred from that first truck onto a different truck. An entirely different group might drive it to your destination, and then maybe a third company will supply workers to unload it at the destination. So, obviously, the fewer times your stuff gets moved from truck to storage and then to another truck, the better. The good news is if your move is pretty short, so if you're just moving from Seattle to Portland, Oregon, or from Chicago to Nashville, or from DC to Boston or Atlanta, something like that, you usually can find companies willing to do the entire job with the same crew. They're going to load up your stuff, that same crew is going to drive it to the destination, and those same workers will unload it. And in advance, they usually try to find a job in that area so they can get a return trip also. But sometimes not. Sometimes they just drive all your stuff down there, spend the night, and come back with an empty truck. That's still for the best. I mean, it means your stuff isn't getting moved from truck to truck unless things are going to get damaged. And also often for these really long distance moves, your stuff's going to share space on a truck with maybe another family's, and then mix-ups occur. They show up and some of your stuff's missing, but I guess you get free stuff from a different household.
And again, you don't know who's going to unload all those precious possessions when you get to the end of the line.
Yeah, I mean, especially with like coast-to-coast moves, unfortunately, you give up some control. You don't know who's going to be driving your stuff or moving it from truck to truck or unloading it at the destination. So the key is at least to control what you can, and that is to pick a local company where you live that does great work. That way you can at least count on getting a good job in terms of the packing and the loading. And if that's the company that booked your move with the interstate carrier, you have someone to turn to if things go wrong, a reputable company to complain to if things don't go right down the road. Another common problem with these really long distance moves is they can't always give you a precise delivery date. You can ask for a guarantee. You can say, look, if it's not there by this date, you have to pay for hotel rooms and meals and maybe a penalty, stuff like that. But that'll add to your costs. And even then, if they're paying for a hotel room, that's not going to completely remove the headache of your stuff not showing up for an extra 2 days. You want to get settled in and get on with your life.
Moving is expensive. Checkbook's undercover shoppers collected prices for several local and interstate moves. For one sample move, which involved a family of 4 with a 3-bedroom house going 2,800 miles, price quotes range from nearly $11,000 to $31,000, with an average cost of about $15,000. Even for local moves, our shoppers found that those with 3-bedroom homes will pay an average of about $7,500 for moving, and several $1,000s more if they need help with packing. So, straight ahead, ways to save money when you move. I'm Herb Weisbaum, the Consumer Man, and this is Consumerpedia, powered by Checkbook.org.
Consumerpedia Fast Facts. According to the latest data from the U.S. Census Bureau, most people who move, about 80%, stay within the same state. What states are people moving to? Florida and Texas top the list. Where are people moving from? The biggest exodus is from California and New York. Many Californians move to Texas, while New Yorkers move to Florida and New Jersey.
So let's try to save some money on this move. One way to do that is using what's called a hybrid moving company. What's that all about, Kevin?
These are the companies that deliver a shipping container or pod to you. Then it gets loaded up with your stuff, and then they come back for that container and they truck it to the destination. With most of these companies, they'll also supply, essentially day laborers to help with packing and loading and unloading. The advantage of these companies is that they're a lot less expensive than traditional moving companies. I mean, for local moves, you may pay only, $250 to $400 for your move if you're willing to load and unload the container. The other nice thing about these services is it gives you a lot more time to do your move. I mean, they can drop it off and you can take a week or however long you want, since you're paying by the day for these containers. And it means you don't have to get everything you own ready so that it can be moved in one day. But the big downside to these companies, they aren't regulated the same way as movers. These self-service movers, they're simply transporting rather than handling your belongings. And so they're not considered moving companies at all. They're considered freight carriers. And that distinction is important because basic insurance for freight is usually set at only about 10 cents per pound. And that's going to be coverage that's almost certainly too low for your belongings. On the other hand, the good news is that your home insurance company should cover your stuff while it's in transit, but make sure to ask. But just know that if problems occur, if all your stuff gets destroyed in transit, that you're going to have to file a claim with your homeowner's insurance company and deal with it.
So what about people who don't want to use the hybrid model using a traditional mover? How can they save money when they move?
I mean, an obvious way to save is to rent your own truck and just get friends to help with your move. But I'm going to tell you now, it's going to take you a lot longer to do that work than a good moving company. And things are going to go wrong compared to hiring a good moving company. Yeah, I realize this is obvious. Even if you hire a moving company, the more work you can do yourself, the less they'll have to move, so the less you'll have to pay. The big savings will be if you can move all your small things that don't fit into boxes. Just load up your car several times and move them. For local moves, that's pretty easy to do. And also, if you can, move as many boxed up items as you can. Move all the boxes, but leave your furniture items to the movers. The less time they're toting around boxes, the better. But don't plan on moving all that stuff yourself on moving day. Get them out of the house before the movers show up, so you're all just not running into one another like in the Three Stooges movie or something.
And here's a tip based on experience. If you're asking your friends to help you move, don't take a cord of firewood along with you. Leave it at the old house. We literally had a situation where we're moving a friend from the TV station, and he says, "Oh, and I got this cord of firewood I'm taking." Are you kidding me? Just leave the firewood for the other people.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, depending on your friends, your mileage is going to vary depending on what kind of help you can expect from your friends, right? When I've had to help people move recently, I'm there for the big stuff. You all can get your lamps moved on your own. Let me help you with what you really need help with, and then, dismiss us right back into our weekend.
Yeah. And if you're paying a mover and you're paying by weight, get rid of stuff before you move. If there's stuff you're not going to want to get rid of it there than on the other end because you paid to move it. That's another big tip. So is it better to pack yourself or pay a company to do that part? What do you think?
So paying for packing, it might cost just as much as the move itself. But keep in mind that some movers, they won't compensate their customers for things that get broken in boxes that the customers packed. In other words, if the company did the packing and something gets broken, well, at that point, there's no question as who's at fault. They did a bad job at packing or handling the item. But I still think it's smart to pack up and transport yourself any fragile or, expensive items that you really care a lot about. The same thing for valuable artwork and computers. I mean, just don't take any chances. You can move those things on your own usually.
And once the movers are arriving at the new home, you need to be there to help direct to where all the stuff goes because you don't want to move the heavy stuff again.
Yeah, don't wander off. I mean, this drives moving companies crazy. The workers are pulling stuff off the truck and there's no one there to tell them where it goes. And, don't go off and hook up your TV or whatever while they're trying to do this, or start unloading boxes when they're still trying to figure out where your big sectional goes. The movers, though, can work a lot more efficiently and quickly. And again, you're usually paying by the hour, right? If you're standing right by the truck and can tell them where to put your stuff, the workers will tell you being there, it really speeds things up for them. And especially for local moves where you're paying by the hour, it'll, in the long run, save you money.
And payment is also a sticking point. A lot of people are surprised to learn that some companies will demand cash payment on the spot. And sometimes they insist that you pay in full for the entire move in cash before they'll even start unloading the truck.
So a lot of times we'll hear from consumers who say, well, I felt like my stuff was being held hostage. They demanded full payment. They stood there with their arms crossed and said, we're not going to open the truck doors and start unloading until you pay us in cash. Unfortunately, they're truly being held hostage. The moving company's demanding $4,000 more than what you agreed to pay. If they're requesting the amount that you actually agreed to pay for interstate moves, for example, they actually have the right to demand payment at that time before they start unloading. So look, it's really important to ask, when and how will I pay for this move? Ask them that when you're collecting estimates and get that policy in writing. If you can, arrange to pay by credit card. A lot of moving companies don't want to deal with that. They want straight cash. But more and more movers are beginning to allow credit card payments. When you pay by credit card, it gets you protections you don't get with cash. If things don't go right, if they've damaged your stuff and won't supply compensation for it, or they don't do something as agreed, you can contest those charges later on with your credit card company.
It's really important because you can complain after the fact, but there really isn't an agency in this country that deals with moving complaints, interstate moving complaints. They collect them at the federal level, but there's nobody there that's going to help you. You're on your own. So if you have that credit card protection, that's really important.
Yeah, so some states for local moves, you can complain to a local consumer authority and they'll take your case. But for interstate moves, there are regulations set up in terms of how they have to handle your move and price it. And you can complain to the Department of Transportation, but they don't have any staff around that will actually enforce their own laws. It's really too bad. And rogue movers know this, right? That there's really no mechanism in place to protect consumers against poor service or even being scammed from moving companies.
And final point that we just have to make is about insurance. Your stuff is usually valued by pound, so you can have some expensive antiques and you're not going to get the value of them unless you buy a separate policy and declare that. Could you just explain a little bit about that to the folks?
Yeah, so the standard protection you'll get for movers is usually a reimbursement rate that's capped at 60 cents per pound, which for most of our household items, they won't cut it, right? I mean, it's not going to fully compensate you if they break, a large item or an antique or something that's valuable. You can buy additional, they don't even call it insurance. They call it valuation coverage protection or full value protection or something like that. We found that, for $50,000 of coverage with no deductible, they usually cost between about $450 to $1,000, depending on the mover. But I really think that, given that moving insurance, what you can buy from these companies, is so expensive, it's better to check your homeowner's or your renter's insurance policy. Your belongings likely are covered while in transit, but it does mean that if a lot of things get broken, you're going to have to file a claim with your insurance company for damaged or lost items. You're going to have to pay that deductible on the policy. And the big problem is you're risking a future rate hike or getting dropped by an insurance company for making a claim. So it's a balancing act. If you have a lot of really expensive, valuable items and you're worried about them getting broken and you can't transport them yourself, maybe it's worth buying additional protection.
Well, Kevin, we could probably talk about this all day, but quite frankly, I got to get moving. See what I did there?
It's so bad.
So we'll pack it up for now and stay safe. We'll talk to you soon.
I'll see you down the road, Herb.
You'll find more information about moving on the Checkbook website or use the link in the show notes. Well, that's it for now. We hope you'll rate this episode and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Remember, we release new episodes every other Thursday. Another way you can support this show is to follow us on Consumerpedia on Facebook and Instagram, and at My Consumerpedia on X, formerly Twitter. I'm Herb Weisbaum. Thanks for listening.
Consumerpedia is a public service of Checkbook.org. We're a unique nonprofit that helps you save money and make smarter choices. You can count on Checkbook to help you find the best services and avoid the worst, with local ratings that are accurate and unbiased. If you live in or around these 7 cities and haven't joined Checkbook yet, check us out. Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Minneapolis-St. Paul, and Washington, D.C. To get your free 30-day subscription, go to checkbook.org/consumerpedia. If you like what you've heard, we hope you'll become a supporter by using the link at the bottom of the show notes to make a small contribution each month. Consumerpedia, empowering consumers to save money and make smarter choices.